Leave Zhonglai to me. I have a way. You go deal with that Jin Cheng. Fu Hu took the initiative to attack Zhonglai, causing Fatty to let out a long sigh of relief. At this moment, Zhonglai, who was surrounded by the blood mist, was like a wild beast. His entire body was occupied by violence. Just a glance was enough to make people feel goosebumps all over their body. Fatty did not think about it and did not dare to go against Zhonglai. He turned his head and looked at Jin Cheng on the other side. His face was sallow and thin. His body hunched, and he appeared weak. The difference between the two was too great. Choosing Zhonglai or Jin Cheng, Fatty did not even need to think for a second to make the right choice. Seeing the complicated expression on Fatty's face, Fu Hu seemed to have seen through his thoughts and kindly reminded him, "Don't look at Jin Cheng's weak appearance. In our batch, his combat strength can definitely rank in the top 2. You must not be careless, or you will die." Every year, many people had died at his hands because they had underestimated Jin Cheng. After hearing this description, Fatty put away his pride and began to carefully size up Jin Cheng. Jin Cheng stood beside Zhonglai, who was as tall as a mountain. He stood on the spot like a needle that was nailed into the ground. His cold and scarlet eyes were like a snake coiled in a dark corner, carefully sizing up Fatty. When Fatty was caught by this gaze, he could not help but shiver all over. An inexplicable pressure pounced on him. It was different from Zhonglai's imposing manner that made people unable to breathe. On the contrary, it made him feel a little scared and chilly from the bottom of his heart. "What are you blabbering about? We're all men." Zhonglai's voice was like thunder. His figure was like a mountain, sweeping up a burst of air wave. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of Fu Hu and swept out a thick leg, blocking Fu Hu's path of dodging. "Is this your blood-body refining art?" Fu Hu's face did not show any panic, but there was a trace of praise in his eyes. Fu Hu calmly and dangerously jumped up slightly, then used the tip of his foot to tap on Zhonglai's leg, and his entire body rose into the air to dodge this attack. Huh. Seeing Fu Hu like this, Zhonglai was a little surprised, and his expression changed slightly, but very quickly, he turned his body and threw another punch. Zhonglai was originally tall and strong. The range of this punch was more than double that of an ordinary person. He chased after Fu Hu, who had yet to land on the ground, and threw another punch. Crash! This punch carried a gust of wind. Before the punch had even arrived, Fu Hu felt a sharp pain on his face from the force of the wind. He forced himself not to close his eyes even for a moment. Because for martial cultivators like them, the key to victory in a battle was often a moment of error, a moment of negligence. In the blink of an eye, if they missed the opponent's attack, they would put themselves into a disadvantageous position, and the opponent would take the opportunity to expand their advantage until they won. At this moment, Fu Hu's clothes exploded, revealing his bronze-colored upper body. His well-defined muscles stuck closely to his body as if they were carved out. Bang! Fu Hu could not dodge in time, so he could only throw a punch. He planned to use his fist to counter this fatal attack. The two fists collided, and the ground under their feet shattered, and the tree branch not far away was broken. Cough! Fu Hu coughed and took 5 steps back. "You can actually take my punch?" Zhonglai's face was full of surprise as he took 2 steps back. Both of their faces were slightly red. The punch just now had already caused their blood and qi to surge. After the clash, they quickly calmed their blood and qi to ease up the situation. As for Fu Hu, the smell of rust appeared on his throat, but he forcefully swallowed it back. Fu Hu still had a rather relaxed expression on his face, so that Zhonglai could not tell that what had just happened had already caused some injuries to Fu Hu. This was a psychological game. When martial artists fought against each other, most of the time, the victor was determined by their cultivation level and cultivation method. However, there were times when people with lower cultivation would emit violence when they were forced into a dead end. They would also have the thought of dying together, which would cause the opponent to be apprehensive and fearful. As long as the opponent had this kind of mentality, then the outcome of the battle would be decided. "Where are you looking?" "Your opponent is me." When Fatty's gaze was attracted by Fu Hu and Zhonglai, a sinister voice sounded in his ears. Just as he turned his head, Fatty caught a glimpse of a few green lights coming at him. He hurriedly cursed and retreated to dodge. But even so, a green light still grazed his arm and opened up a bloody wound. The flesh in the wound started to turn slightly green, which shocked Fatty. "You used poison?" Jin Chung sneered. "What, do you have an opinion? If you don't want to be poisoned to death by me, then just give up resisting. I'll also send you to your death quickly. Otherwise, you'll be tortured to death by my viridescent flower falcon's poison. You'll bleed to death from all 7 orifices." Only then did the fatty notice that above Jin Cheng's right shoulder, there was a green falcon hovering. On the falcon's chest and abdomen, there were many beautiful flowers. But right at this moment, a golden toad broke out from the soil beneath the fatty's feet. It opened its mouth and spat out a ball of poisonous gas toward the fatty's mat. "Not good." The fatty cried out inwardly, "Not good." He hurriedly retreated and hid on a nearby tree. "Jin Chung, these spirit beasts of yours really match up to you?" The fatty's eyelids twitched. This Jin Chung specialized in nurturing poisonous spirit beasts, and the worst part was that the fatty didn't know if Jin Chung had any other spirit beasts. Thus, he had to be extra cautious. So, another sound pierced through the air. The moment he heard this sound, the fatty's hair stood on end, because he could clearly hear that this sound came from behind. Fatty had lived a life of licking blood from the edge of a knife for so many years, yet he did not realize that there was an enemy behind him. He hurriedly kicked the trunk of the big tree and flew to the right. Bang! The branch that he had just landed on was hit by that attack. The originally brown branch was stuck with a lump of white paste. Following the direction of the attack, Fatty swept his gaze over. On a large tree 20 meters away, he saw a person the size of an ordinary person standing still. He was blinking his 4 pairs of pitch-black eyes as he arrogantly moved his mouth pincers towards him. Hiss! Fatty's hair stood on end once again. Could it be that this Jin Chung had some special fetishes, specifically nurturing the 5 poisons? "That Fuhu, I saw how hard you fought with Zhang Lai. If you see how weak Jin Chung is, why don't we swap? Just treat it as me being at a disadvantage." Fatty looked at Fu Hu, who was fighting with Zhang Lai in the distance with a thick face. When he spoke, his face did not turn red and his heart did not skip a beat. As he spoke, he cursed Fu Hu in his heart. This Fu Hu must have known Jin Cheng's trump card in advance, so he had to fight with Zhang Lai, who looked fiercer from the start. In fact, he had chosen a relatively weaker opponent. "Hee hee, brother Fatty, thank you for your good intentions. However, there's no need to be so polite. Leave this Zhang Lai to me." City Lord's estate, underground. After that, Lin Bai went to a few places that were exactly the same as the previous high platforms, except that the enemies on the high platforms were different each time. The spiritual beasts' ranks became higher and higher, and the people's cultivation levels also became higher and higher. However, the number of people was much less than before. "Little Blue, if you can't hold on any longer, hurry up and come down. Don't push yourself." Lin Bai stood at a corner of the high platform. His eyes were like torches as he watched Little Blue's fighting figure. He kindly reminded him. He had thought that if there were enemies looking for him, he would take care of 1 or 2 of them at the same time. This would also reduce the pressure on Little Blue and prevent him from getting injured. But who would have thought that no enemies would come looking for him even after he arrived here? This made the corners of Lin Bai's mouth twitch. Could I be some kind of ferocious demon? At this moment, in the center of the high platform, there were 6 green leopards that were as tall as adults, with a length of 5 to 6 meters, not counting their tails. They were currently engaged in a fierce battle with Little Blue. The ranks of these green leopards weren't low at all. If they could be brought out, there would definitely be many beastmasters willing to spend a lot of money to buy and tame them. Not to mention, these green leopards had pure bloodlines, which wasn't something beasts of outside could compare with. Little Blue was far from being as calm as before when it faced these 6 green leopards. Instead, it began to treat them carefully and cautiously, and its face no longer had that cheeky look from before. Imagine. Seeing this, Lin Bai nodded his head in satisfaction. It was a good thing that Little Blue was cheeky, but in a real battle, if it was still as cheeky as before, it would really be courting death. Moreover, if it put all his heart and soul into the battle, It would also greatly increase the efficiency of its battle experience accumulation. At this moment, 4 green panthers opened their bloody mouths and aimed at Little Blue's legs. They gnawed at Little Blue's legs while the other 2 green panthers waved their claws and slapped the sky above Little Blue to stop it from escaping. When Lin Bai saw this, he clenched his fists and bent his knees slightly. If there was even the slightest accident, he planned to rush forward. It was indeed a good thing to let Little Blue fight to the death, but he could not let Little Blue be seriously injured, let alone die. That was not what Lin Bai wanted to see. A teasing smile appeared on Little Blue's taut face. Its entire body floated in a strange posture in mid-air. It just happened to dodge the 6 green panthers' fangs at a high altitude. After floating in the air, Little Blue dodged to the left and right, dodging the 2 claws that were sweeping towards it. This? Lin Bai's eyes widened. He never expected Little Blue to bring such a pleasant surprise. Little Blue used its tail that flickered with golden light as a pillar to stand on the ground, and its body used the momentum to float in the air. Not bad, not bad. Lin Bai couldn't help but clap his hands. What he wanted was Little Blue's dexterity and Little Blue's smart mind, which knew how to use every part of its body. After successfully dodging, Little Blue did not stop. Instead, it used both of its fists and legs to cut the throats of 3 green leopards. In the end, its figure disappeared like a ghost. When it reappeared, one of its hands pierced into the heart of one of the green leopards. In just a few seconds, the battle situation suddenly changed. Little Blue, who was originally at a disadvantage due to being surrounded, easily took care of 4 green leopards. At this moment, there were only 2 left in front of him. Not long after, the remaining 2 green leopards were also easily taken care of by Little Blue. The invisible shackles around the high platform disappeared, and a stream of spiritual energy poured into Lin Bai's body. Lin Bai was not surprised, nor did he refuse to allow the spiritual energy to be absorbed in. After several battles, Lin Bai finally felt that every time he took care of a challenge on the high platform, there would be a wisp of spiritual energy as a reward. However, the spiritual energy was too weak at the beginning, so Lin Bai did not notice it. It seems that after I get the reward on the next high platform, I can impart strength to Little Blue. While Lin Bai was looking forward to what kind of changes Little Blue would undergo after imparting strength, he was also thinking about when he could break through the bottleneck and progress. If he succeeded in breaking through, then he would have the strength to fight with the City Lord. Come, Little Blue, you must be exhausted. As Lin Bai said this, he threw a few pills to Little Blue to replenish his vitality. Then, Little Blue jumped onto Lin Bai's shoulder and began to digest the medicinal effects. Before this, Little Blue had easily won. It seemed that this time, Little Blue did not win easily and had even used up quite a bit of spirit energy. I can't be careless in the next round. Lin Bai's gaze was firm as he walked onto the stone bridge once again and once again entered the entrance of the stone wall. On the way, he carefully took out the small cauldron that did not have any special features. It looked like an ordinary small cauldron, and he urged a stream of spirit energy into it. However, the small cauldron was just like an ordinary object. It was like a piece of junk on the street, and there was no response at all. It still doesn't work. Lin Bai shook his head in disappointment. After the small cauldron broke through the restriction of the altar, Lin Bai had tried several times to use the power of the small cauldron. However, no one knew which one had made a mistake. The small cauldron did not react at all, let alone activate the power of the small cauldron for its own use. Not long after, the same high platform appeared in front of Lin Bai and Little Blue. This time, they did not hesitate at all. They stepped onto the stone bridge and walked onto the high platform. A moment later, an invisible seal appeared around the high platform, blocking their path of retreat. Once again, those phantoms appeared in the middle of the high platform. 5 pitch-black phantoms gradually transformed into people with flesh and blood. Among them, 3 used spears, 1 used a knife, and 1 used a sword. At this moment, Little Blue had already recovered its vitality. When it saw these 5 people, its eyes lit up once again as it looked at Lin Bai, chattering, "Let me do it! Let me do it!" After numerous battles, Little Blue felt that its control over its body was increasing at a terrifying speed. Furthermore, it was also beginning to love the feeling of fighting. Lin Bai nodded, but still did not stop it. He did not only want to train Little Blue's strength, but also wanted to see the upper limit of Little Blue's strength. He wanted to have a precise grasp of Little Blue's strength, or else there would be all kinds of difficulties in the future. Little Blue rushed up excitedly and once again landed in the center of the high platform. It once again stretched out its hand and made a provocative action. As for Lin Bai, he retreated to a corner of the high platform, as if everything on the high platform had nothing to do with him. Buzz! A sword chime resounded through the sky. Lin Bai's originally calm voice flickered, leaving an afterimage on the spot. The sword stabbed at the afterimage. "Are you finally going to make a move on me?" Lin Bai had a smile on his lips as he watched the swordsman walk over step by step. The remaining people looked at Lin Bai and then locked their gazes on Little Blue again. Clearly, they did not want to fight with Lin Bai. "You have a personality." This was something that Lin Bai had not expected. He revealed a little surprise. He had originally thought that these people would swarm over to deal with him, but he had not expected that only this swordsman would want to make a move. "It just so happens that I have not made a move for a long time. I'll play with you. I hope you that when you have a son, he doesn't." Looking at Fu Hu's back, Fatty greeted him warmly. Of course, in his heart. Fatty had never expected that Fu Hu would seize the initiative and throw him such a troublesome opponent just because of his carelessness. But now, Fatty could only bite the bullet. Otherwise, he would be poisoned to death. Fatty had been licking blood on his blade for so many years and had seen all kinds of corpses. Among them, the people who were poisoned to death were the most miserable. Some poisons made people rot from the inside out. The gas produced by the rot made people's bodies swell up like a rubber ball. If someone poked it at this moment, that flesh would explode. The ball would explode, and the flesh and internal organs would splatter all over the ground. It was as if the poison had caused one's 7 orifices to bleed to death. Regardless of whether it was the appearance of death or the pain, it was considered good. So, just as Fatty was cursing Fu Hu, the sound of air being torn apart could be heard, and a few green lights shot over like arrows. F***CK. Your fatty grandpa is going all out today. Watch how I take care of you, a sickly person. Fatty cried out in pain as he dodged left and right, easily dodging the attack of the green flower falcon. The attack of the green flower falcon hit the big tree behind him, and the big tree started to wither. This made Fatty's eyebrows jump as he looked at his wound. The area around his wound had also started to turn green. It had only been a short while, but the poison had already spread to this extent. The Fatty gritted his teeth and hardened his heart. He pulled out a dagger and gouged out the flesh around his wound. The bloody flesh was already rotten meat. "It's too late." Jin Chung sneered as he looked at the Fatty's actions. "My green flower falcon carries a kind of lethal poison. Although its effect is slightly weaker to humans, it will still slowly seep in and kill you bit by bit." The Fatty's face darkened and he didn't say a word. At this moment, he was being attacked by 3 spirit beasts, 2 on the ground and 1 in the air. Other than that, there was also Jin Chung who was standing on the same spot. God knows what other tricks he had up his sleeves. Jin Chung saw the Fatty's expression change, and his previous frivolity was replaced with a bit of chilliness. This caused Jin Chung to raise his guard. He knew that with the City Lord's help, Fatty had successfully broken through. He did not dare to be too careless. "Golden Toad, you go. Green Flower Falcon, you stay by my side." Jin Chung began to command. He let Golden Toad go to the front. As for the Green Flower Falcon, he let it protect his body. From this, it could be seen how careful he was. But at this moment, he did not expect Fatty to turn around and run into the forest behind him. "Quick, Golden Toad, don't let him run." Jin Chung cursed in his heart and sent out Golden Toad quickly, while he and the Green Flower Falcon followed closely behind. "If I get closer and take a look, it'll be even more terrifying." Fatty saw that the tree trunk was more than 10 meters away from the ground. It was like an adult-sized spider. His face was slightly pale, and goosebumps appeared on his entire body. However, he still braced himself and jumped up abruptly. He threw out a few daggers and stabbed at the 4 pairs of eyes of the spider. The spider was a little surprised that Fatty had suddenly attacked it. It had not had the time to spread out its hunting net in this area, so it could only accept the battle in a hurry. The slender legs of the spider knocked down a few daggers, but there was still a dagger that grazed its huge body, making a cut. Green blood flowed out of the wound. The attack succeeded. Fatty stepped on the tree trunk and used the momentum to grab the dagger and stab at the spider. Ignorant. Jean Cheng's cold and disdainful voice came from behind. At the same time, the golden toad landed from the air and spat out a mouthful of poisonous gas, sweeping towards Fatty. Fatty did not have a point of leverage at the moment. He could not dodge in the air in time and would definitely be corroded by the poisonous gas. The poisonous gas from the golden toad was Jean Cheng's most poisonous poison. It would only take an instant for his flesh and blood to rot and his bones to be dyed black. Not good. Fatty's expression changed drastically and a look of despair appeared on his face. When Jean Cheng saw this, a smile finally appeared on his face. He knew that he had won. However, just as Jean Cheng felt that victory was certain, Fatty's body was in the air and he turned around in disbelief. His feet were still stepping on the air, and his entire person was shot like a cannonball attacking Jean Cheng. Jean Cheng wanted to dodge, wanting to grab the green flower falcon to dodge, but in the end, he was a step too late. In a trance, Fatty arrived in front of him with an embarrassed smile on his face. Jean Cheng subconsciously used his hands to protect his front, wanting to block Fatty's attack. However, he did not expect Fatty to suddenly pull out a leg and directly strike between Jean Cheng's crotch. Bang! An egg shattered. Jean Cheng's sinister face became extremely distorted. His 2 scarlet eyes were filled with blood capillaries. His mouth was so big that he could not even let out a pitiful scream. Hey, are you still cool down there? The Fatty's face had a despicable smile. Since he had already beaten Jean Cheng, why not beat him up to his heart's content? With this thought in mind, Fatty once again pulled out a leg and kicked towards Jean Cheng's crotch. But this time, the spider's attack and the golden toad's poisonous gas swept over from behind. The green flower falcon flapped its wings, and in the blink of an eye, Jean Cheng was brought far away. Fatty could only give up on attacking and chase after Jean Cheng. He dodged to the right and entered the bushes. However, even though he did not manage to kill Jean Cheng in one go, he did not know why, but he felt exceptionally comfortable at this moment. At this moment, looking at the golden toad and the creepy spider, Fatty felt that they were much more pleasing to the eye. Jean Cheng was brought to an empty space by the green flower falcon. His knees were weak as he knelt on the ground. His forehead was filled with shouts, but the expression on his face was not as twisted as before. Fatty, you, I will make sure you die a horrible death. The intense pain caused Jean Cheng's tone to become sharper, but one could still hear the rage in his heart. Fatty placed a hand behind his right ear, his face full of doubt. Was there a little girl screaming just now? I didn't hear it clearly. Jean Cheng's originally sallow face turned blood red, and after it turned blood red, a thick layer of green appeared. Pooh! Jean Cheng finally spat out a mouthful of blood. When Fatty saw Jean Cheng in this state, he held it in for a long time before saying, Good. I'll fight it out with you. Jean Cheng's eyes were bloodshot and his gaze was gloomy. Then, as if he had crushed something, a black light flashed under his feet. All of a sudden, black chi surrounded Jean Cheng's body and drowned his figure. Jean Cheng, are you planning to run now? You're too spineless. Fatty mocked. Run? I'll take your life. Jean Cheng's voice came out from the black mist. A gust of wind blew past and the black mist was blown away. A huge snake that was as thick as a tree trunk with a pitch-black body and a pair of scarlet eyes stared at Fatty. F***CKme. A pitch-black and glossy black snake coiled around Jean Cheng's body. Its body was as thick as a tree trunk, and its length was 20 to 30 meters. The 2 chilling fangs in its mouth was the size of an adult's arm. If he were to be bitten, even Fatty felt that he did not need snake venom to die here. Fatty, do you regret it now? I told you to surrender and let me give you a quick and painless result, but you didn't want it and... Halfway through his sentence, Jin Chung clenched his teeth tightly, and his teeth started to creak. Now, I will capture you alive. After that, I will use all of my poison to slowly torture you until you can't do it anymore. Then, I will give you an antidote and cure you. This is repeated over and over again, making you wish you were dead. Jin Cheng's tone was filled with anger, and the words he said made people feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. A chill went from the fatty's tailbone to his head. Just thinking about the outcome of being unable to live and wish for death made the fatty feel terrified. However, he was not a pushover either. Hee, that's only possible if you can capture me. Jin Chung, are you a man or a woman now? Why don't you just be a little girl? Look at your skinny arms and legs. The fatty's mouth did not give in and started to hit Jin Cheng's sore spot. Jin Chung wiped the sweat on his forehead with one hand and covered his crotch with the other. It felt painful even if he took a small step. At this moment, after hearing the fatty's words, Jin Cheng's face became even more twisted and his scarlet eyes stared at the fatty. If gazes could kill, Fatty would have been pierced through thousands of times by this gaze. All you have left is your stubborn mouth. Jin Chung urged the black snake, sweeping it in Fatty's direction. At the same time, the golden toad rushed out from the ground again, shooting a mouthful of poisonous gas at Fatty. It wasn't over yet. The spider's protruding poisonous web also blocked Fatty's escape route. F***CK. The Fatty cursed loudly. This was the reason why he hated beastmasters. A one-on-one fight suddenly turned into a group fight. He was still the target of the group fight. The fatty stomped on the ground fiercely, creating a hole in the ground. At the same time, he threw out a dagger, striking the spider web that was charging at him at high speed. The dagger plunged into the tree trunk with a clang along with the spider web. Bang! The thick tail of the black snake was pulled out and smashed onto the spot where Fatty was originally standing. Immediately, sand and stones flew everywhere, creating a foul atmosphere. Looking at that spot again, there was already a hole like a grave. The corner of Fatty's mouth could not help but twitch. If he had been hit by this black snake just now, he might have turned into a pile of meat paste and stayed in the grave pit. He looked into the distance. Fu Hu and Zhang Lai were still engaged in close combat. The fight was so intense that it could not be stopped. No one dared to make even the slightest mistake. Otherwise, the outcome would have been determined. You still have the time to care about others? Jin Cheng's cold voice came from beside him. Fatty dodged left and right, successfully dodging the black snake's attacks again and again. The spider was behind him, and there were still those 3 thorny retail beasts in front of him. If he continued dodging like this, it would be impossible for him to get close to Jin Chung. The result would be that he would run out of stamina and fall into Jin Cheng's hands. This was precisely the taboo in a battle between warriors and beastmasters. Beastmasters mostly controlled their subdued beasts to launch attacks from afar, and the key point in a battle between warriors and beastmasters was how to block the attacks of spirit beasts on one side, while closing the distance between them and the beastmaster. After all, only when a beastmaster died would a warrior have a chance of winning. Humph! Seeing the fatty's gaze turn sharp, Jin Chung couldn't help but snort coldly. You finally know that running away is useless? But let me tell you, even if you want to get close to me, it's impossible. So, you'd better surrender obediently and kowtow to me a few more times. If I'm in a good mood, I might even give you a quick death. Heh! Looks like you've forgotten about the pain after healing your scar. As the fatty spoke, his gaze wantonly looked between Jin Cheng's legs. Jin Chung did not understand what the fatty meant at the beginning, but when he saw the fatty's mocking gaze, his face turned livid once again. Good, good, good. Jin Chung said good consecutively, each word coming out from the gaps of his teeth with a heavy trembling tone. It was clear how angry he was at this moment. Jin Chung had always been proud and aloof. In his eyes, others were always lower than him. However, the person whom he looked down on the most had made him suffer such a great humiliation today. His anger turned into laughter. Jin Chung threw his head back and laughed. At the same time, the green flower falcon and the black snake, one in the sky and the other on the ground, rushed toward Fatty one after another. The two spirit beasts attacked him head-on while the golden toad and the spider hid in the dark and ambushed him wantonly. Fatty's eyelids were twitching. Wasn't that a little too much? Now that things had come to this point, it was impossible for Fatty to take back what he had said. Seeing the change in Fatty's eyes, the cruel and ruthless smile on Jin Cheng's face deepened. A few rays of green light shot down from the sky like lightning, sealing off the area behind Fatty. The black snake charged straight at Fatty and even swung its thick tail. The situation changed drastically. The Fatty wasn't able to dodge. The trim of his pants was slightly stained by the poisonous substance of the golden toad. Instantly, the pants began to emit white smoke. Immediately, it began to burn. The Fatty cursed in his heart and tore off half of the leg of his pants. The leg of his pants had just landed on the ground when it was burnt into ashes. The wind blew, and it disappeared without a trace. Consider yourself lucky. Jin Cheng sneered repeatedly. Roar. Just as Fatty had just steadied himself, a sharp roar came from behind him. It was as if he was using his fingers to scratch the iron sheet, making people feel uncomfortable. You want to let this spider fight me head-on? It's useless. Fatty turned his head and saw an adult version of a spider attacking him. His face showed disapproval. After a few exchanges, he was very clear that this spider needed to pay attention to the spider silk that it could spit out at any time. Regardless of whether the spider silk was sticky or tough, it did not need to be long. However, this spider only looked scary on the surface, but in reality, it was not as terrifying as the golden toad. The spider waved its two sharp front legs towards the clavicle spikes on Fatty's shoulders. The angle was tricky and its speed was extremely fast. However, it was still kicked by Fatty's front leg. Then, he flashed to the right side of the spider. Be more obedient and quietly stay to the side. Fatty pulled out a leg and kicked towards the spider's waist. There was no shell there, and it was relatively weaker compared to other places. It was the best choice. But right at this moment, Fatty heard several ear-piercing sounds coming from the side of his ears. Numerous spider webs rushed towards him. However, these spider webs were much smaller than before. Pung! Fatty's entire body was entangled by small pieces of spider webs. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. How dare you play dirty with me? Under the city lord's estate, on the high platform, Little Blue shuttled back and forth between the four of them. However, this movement was not as smooth as before. There were a few times when the weapons of those few people had brushed against Little Blue's body. At this moment, there were already a few small scratches on its back and shoulders. However, the more this was the case, the more there was a rush of energy on Little Blue's face and the depths of its eyes. It became more and more excited and threw itself into the battle, enjoying the fun of battle. On the other side of the high platform, Lin Bai was fighting with a person holding a sword. The two figures shuttled through various corners of the high platform, appearing and disappearing in a flash. Their speed was so fast that it was impossible for the naked eye to catch up to them. The more Lin Bai fought with this person, the more surprised he became. In the previous few battles on the high platform, each person and each monster had fought evenly. However, on this high platform, this swordsman's speed was much faster than the others. His sword techniques were even more profound, but his moves were extremely simple. There were no profound sword techniques, but each time, Lin Bai felt that it was extremely difficult to deal with him. Suddenly, a sword light flashed from the top down. Lin Bai's footwork was nimble, and he flashed to the right. However, at the same time, a sword light came from the left to the right, and it swept over with a stronger, pure killing intent than the previous one. The swordsman's eyes flashed, and he let out a sigh of relief. In his eyes, the scene of Lin Bai being hit by the second sword light, with blood splattering all over his body, had already appeared. It's too early to be happy. However, at this moment, an emotionless voice came from behind the swordsman. This voice was like the call of hell, and it made people tremble all over. Lin Bai circulated his cultivation technique and gathered it on his hand blade. The hand blade swiftly passed through the distance between the two of them and pierced into the back of the swordsman. The swordsman's eyes were filled with disbelief until the end. However, there was not a trace of pain in them. Instead, there was a hint of relief. Soon after, his physical body turned into a black shadow and disappeared from this world. Lin Bai could not help but shake his head. It seemed like these swordsmen had been forcefully restrained by some kind of power. It was very likely that they had already died, but they were unable to leave after they died. Little Blue, do you need help? Lin Bai quickly composed himself. At the moment, the most important thing was still the matter at hand. He couldn't continue with the secret regarding this place. If he were to take a huge risk, Lin Bai still needed to consider whether he could bear it. On the other side, Little Blue had already finished off 2 people and was currently fighting with the remaining people. Not bad. Lin Bai watched for a while and nodded his head in satisfaction. He could see that after a few rounds of fighting, Little Blue was getting more and more proficient in its methods of attack. He was becoming more and more skilled. This was the reason why Lin Bai wanted Little Blue to fight alone. After a while, Little Blue successfully finished off the remaining people. After that, a few more figures turned into black shadows and disappeared into the world. Little Blue watched the few black shadows disappear. Its eyes could not help but be stunned. Then, it blinked its eyes and looked at Lin Bai. Where did they all go? They seem to be very happy. Don't mind them. When we get out of here, we will naturally know the answer. Lin Bai patted Little Blue's head and threw it a few pills that replenished its vitality. They rushed through many high platforms in a row. At this moment, the invisible shackles in front of them were once again opened. However, Lin Bai was not in a hurry to move forward. Instead, he planned to bring Little Blue here to recuperate. After Little Blue swallowed the pills, it began to catalyze the medicinal effects. However, she fell into a deep sleep halfway through. Lin Bai found this scene rather funny as he curled his lips. After a long while, Little Blue woke up. Little Blue, come here. Lin Bai called Little Blue to his side. When Little Blue saw Lin Bai's gaze, it knew what was going to happen next. Its face was full of anticipation. System, I want to pass on my cultivation to Little Blue, Lin Bai said in his heart. Ding. Host has given Little Blue 50 days of cultivation. 30 times return has been successfully triggered. The host has received a return of 1,500 days of cultivation. After breaking through so many obstacles on the high platform, Lin Bai had already accumulated quite a few days of spiritual chi rewards. However, this 30-fold return made Lin Bai's eyebrows jump. He had wanted to trigger a higher multiple, but this kind of thing depended on luck and fate. It was useless even if he was anxious. On the other hand, Little Blue's body was much firmer than before, and it seemed to be much taller than before. Other than these changes, Lin Bai could clearly feel that the golden patterns on Little Blue's body were becoming more and more resplendent, as if it was alive and flowing in its fur. Not bad. Wait until we hit a few more high platforms, then I'll continue imparting strength to you. As Lin Bai spoke, he patted his shoulder with one hand. Little Blue understood and jumped up. It even wrapped her tail around Lin Bai's neck and was already thinking about the next time he would pass on strength to it. Another half a day passed. Lin Bai and Little Blue passed 5 more high platforms. Each time, the number of monsters on the high platforms would decrease by 1, but the strength of the monsters on the high platforms would increase exponentially. Phew! Lin Bai wiped the thin layer of sweat on his forehead, and his breathing was not as steady as before. Little Blue simply sat on the ground. It sat on the ground and panted heavily. There was a scar on its shoulder that was neither deep nor shallow. From the beginning of the last stage, he could not let Little Blue fight alone. The two of them worked together in this stage, but Lin Bai was still a little out of breath. However, this was still within Lin Bai's tolerance range. There aren't many stages left. Lin Bai estimated in his heart that if things went according to the previous stage, there should only be about 4 stages left. I need to be very careful next. Neither Little Blue nor I can be seriously injured. Otherwise, it will affect the battle and cause a huge headache. Lin Bai's thoughts drifted for a while. Then he waved at Little Blue, who was sitting on the ground. Little Blue rushed over with a face full of joy. System, I want to pass on my cultivation to Little Blue. Ding. Host has given Little Blue 50 days of cultivation. 40 times return has been successfully triggered. Host has received 2,000 days of return of cultivation. Lin Bai felt the power circulating all over his body. His meridians were much thicker than before. He stretched out a hand and gently clenched it. There seemed to be twice as much power circulating in his palm as before. As for Little Blue, the golden light on its body became even more resplendent, and its body grew a little taller. Based on this progress, when we get out of here, you and I will have a pretty good improvement. When we fight with the City Lord, I won't be as weak as before and can only run away like last time. As Lin Bai spoke, he tried to mobilize a strand of spiritual power and inject it into the small cauldron. However, the small cauldron was still as calm as an ancient well and did not have the slightest reaction. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the next high platform. Two black figures that were sitting cross-legged on the ground gradually appeared. They were two sturdy and rough human figures. Their hair was disheveled and draped over their shoulders. One of them slowly opened his eyes. A dazzling ray of light that carried an ancient and unsophisticated aura assaulted his face. Fatty tried his best to circulate his cultivation technique, twisting left and right in an attempt to break free. However, the viscosity and tenacity of those spider webs were too strong. Every time he felt like he was going to break free, he would be stuck to them once again. On the ground not too far away from Fatty, under the feet of the adult version of the spider, there were a bunch of fist-sized little spiders scattered around. The adult-sized spider just now was pretending to fight with Fatty, but it was to let these little spiders get close to him so that the little spiders could trap Fatty with the spider web. Jin Cheng, you played dirty with me. Fatty cursed loudly and looked up. Jin Cheng was smiling as he slowly walked towards him. The green cloud falcon hovered in the sky, monitoring the situation around it. The golden toad and the spiders were waiting for an opportunity to act not far away, while the 20-30-meter long black snake once again turned into smoke, as if Jin Cheng had kept it back. Hey, you're finally in my hands, right? Now you just wait and see how I'll deal with you. Jin Cheng's pair of scarlet eyes sized up the Fatty as if he was looking at fish meat on a chopping board. He had already thought of all kinds of methods to deal with the Fatty. Bang! Jin Cheng stepped on the Fatty's face. The tip of his foot pressed against his fat face, and his heel spun left and right with the tip of his foot. You made me really painful. Jin Cheng looked at Fatty and only felt a slight pain in both of his legs. Between his legs, there was a faint pain, and he would look at Fatty's abdomen from time to time, his eyes filled with madness. When Fatty saw Jin Cheng's gaze, his entire body shuddered. He wanted to use his hands to protect himself, but his hands had long been stuck by the spider web and could not move at all. Bang! Bang! Jin Cheng stepped on Fatty's body a few more times. After a moment, Fatty's entire body became swollen and green. It's a pity that I still have to keep you to torture you slowly. Otherwise, I would like to finish you off right now. Don't worry. After I finish off that foo-hoo, I will bring you back to the City Lord's estate. There are all sorts of poisons that I have reared there, as well as the antidote that I have left behind. I will slowly serve you. Jin Cheng's expression was cold, and his tone was sinister. However, I can still make you suffer a little more. Jin Cheng spoke halfway and slowly walked to the Fatty's waist. Then, he looked down and raised one leg high up. F***CK. You. The Fatty's forehead was covered in sweat. Seeing Jin Cheng's actions, he immediately knew what Jin Cheng's next plan was. He opened his mouth to stop him, but he didn't know what to say. Haha, now you know fear. Weren't you still very arrogant just now? Jin Cheng would not give Fatty the chance to beg for mercy. He suddenly guessed.
No.
Fatty cried out in despair. However, just as Jin Cheng's foot was about to land, he trembled and stopped. Don't force me. Fatty did not know when he had stood up. He held a dagger in his hand and stabbed it directly into Jin Cheng's heart. As the dagger was pulled out, fresh blood spurted out in all directions. You! Jin Cheng's face was filled with disbelief, and his body collapsed weakly. The area under his body was dyed in a pool of blood. The green cloud falcon, golden toad, and the adult-sized spider also wanted to stop him, but they didn't have time to do anything. Spirit beasts without beastmasters seemed to have lost their limbs, and it didn't take long for the fatty to finish them off. Sigh. The fatty shook his head. It really is difficult to get close to a beastmaster. If it wasn't for Jin Chung wanting to capture me alive, I really wouldn't have been able to defeat him. The fatty was certain that Jin Chung wanted to capture him alive, which was why he fell into the adult spider's trap. He pretended to be entangled by the spider web, but in fact, he was able to break free from it a long time ago. Of course, this was also thanks to the City Lord. If it wasn't for the City Lord giving him pills that allowed him to break through his cultivation, which hadn't progressed at all for many years, he really wouldn't have been able to break free from the spider web. These two conditions that he had met by chance allowed him to successfully get close and successfully counterattack Jin Chung. Otherwise, he would have died here today. The spot where Fatty had been injured by the green flower falcon had already begun to fester and stink. He began to search Jin Cheng's clothes. Money, paper. I have it. Fatty took out a porcelain bottle with a face full of joy and impatiently swallowed it. Then, he began to circulate his cultivation method to catalyze the medicinal efficacy. The medicinal efficacy was gradually dispersed, and his body also began to slowly burn. All right, the rest will probably slowly recover. Fatty looked at the wound. The festering of the wound was already spider-like. Even though it was still somewhat green, it was much better than before. He hurriedly began to bandage it. After I get out of here, I have to think of a way to beg Lin Bai to spar with me. Fatty thought for a moment and made up his mind. After dealing with his opponent, Fatty was able to cast his gaze towards the battle between Fu Hu and Zhang Lai. However, just as he cast his gaze out, he saw Zhang Lai's eyes wide open as he rolled far away. The whites of his eyes were bloodshot. Poochie. Zhang Lai spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. However, the blood was a little black. You used poison. Zhang Lai's face was filled with anger and filled with fury. He wanted to continue attacking, but his body had already run out of strength. Who said you can't use poison? There was not a trace of pity on Fu Hu's face. On the contrary, he was as calm as the wind and the clouds. He suddenly charged forward and swung his palm blade. Zhang Lai's head flew up high and landed on the ground again. You're really sinister. Fatty could not help but say. He originally thought that until the end, Fu Hu had intended to win in a melee fight. After all, he was half naked at that time. Who would have thought that he could still use poison in such a situation? You are also scheming. The same goes for you. Fu Hu used his eyes to signal to Jin Chung. He had taken the time to see the battle between Fatty and Jin Chung, so he knew everything that had happened. After that, the two of them did not say anything. They looked at each other and smiled. Everything was said without saying anything. Most of the people in the City Lord's estate have been dealt with by us. Among them are the troublesome Zhang Lai and Jin Chung. This time, the City Lord's hands are really empty. Fatty looked at the corpses on the ground in the distance and sighed. He had never thought that he would be able to do so much. Of course, this was all part of Fu Hu's scheme and strategy. Heh, this is still not enough. Next, I'm going to do another job. Are you coming? Fu Hu revealed a simple and honest smile as he looked at Fatty. Don't use this smiling face on me. I'm scared. After interacting with him for a few days, Fatty finally understood what it meant to hide a knife in a smile. Go to the City Lord's estate? Yes. Then I'll definitely go. The City Lord's estate was currently empty. Even if something happened, as long as he did not meet the City Lord directly, Fatty was confident that he could escape. Furthermore, Lin Bai was also in the City Lord's estate, so he had some intention of helping him. After a short discussion, the two of them turned around once again and rushed towards the City Lord's estate. Are you serious? The City Lord sat in the center of the hall, on a luxurious chair. His pair of cold eyes were like poisonous snakes as he scrutinized the guard who came to report the news. The guard nodded abruptly. However, he had just spoken when he was rendered speechless by the City Lord's imposing manner. He swallowed his saliva before continuing. It's absolutely true. I was on a routine patrol in the suburbs today. However, he suddenly saw flames soaring into the sky. The sounds of explosions and miserable screams could be heard endlessly. It was at Early Slope. The situation at that time was too complicated, and I was alone, so I didn't. After I saw it, I immediately returned to report to you. Early slope. The city lord muttered to himself. He didn't care about the guard's words at all. This made the head guard sigh in relief. Previously, he was afraid that he would be scolded by the city lord. Before this, the city lord had specially given an order. If any special circumstances were discovered within the capital, he would be the first to be reported to, just like what the guard was doing at this moment. Leave, bring a few more people, and go to Early Slope to investigate the situation. The city lord waved his hand at the guard, signaling him to leave. When the city lord saw this, the nervousness on his face was swept away. He hurriedly left and disappeared in front of the main hall. He did not want to stay a second longer. Not only did the city lord know Early Slope, but he also knew the route Fu Hu and the others had taken. They had to pass through this place. He hadn't expected such a situation to happen. There were Jin Cheng, Zhang Lai, and a few hundred people from the city lord's estate there. He wasn't worried that something unexpected would happen. Could it be Lin Bai? The city lord frowned and immediately shook his head, dispelling this thought. Based on his understanding of Lin Bai would not do such a thing. He had the urge to immediately rush over and see what was going on. However, the city lord's estate was already weak internally. If he were to leave as well, suddenly, the city lord's eyes emitted a dazzling cold light. He suddenly turned his head to look at the bewitching entrance behind him. Could it be? Sigh. Without those annoying fellows, the capital city is much quieter. Fu Hu sighed as he walked. He and Fatty returned to the capital city together. In the beginning, there were a few spies keeping an eye on them, but they were easily taken care of by them. After that, they never saw any members of the city lord's estate again. Hee. A smile appeared on Fatty's fierce face as he held 2 drumsticks in each of his hands. If we go to the city lord's estate now, won't it be like entering an uninhabited realm? Fatty ate as he chewed on the drumsticks. Fu Hu couldn't help but roll his eyes. That's easy to think. There's still the city lord overseeing the place. Why don't you distract him and let me enter an uninhabited realm? Cough, cough. Fatty shook his head. The two of us have risked our lives and are wearing the same pair of pants. Do you have the heart to send me to my death? F*CKU. Who's wearing the same pair of pants as you? Fu Hu rolled his eyes at Fatty again. While the two of them were talking, the city lord's estate appeared in front of them. On the other side of a noisy and lively street was a quiet street. After walking past this street was the city lord's estate. From where they were, they could see the tall buildings in the city lord's estate from afar. Let's go this way. Fu Hu brought Fatty and turned into a small alley on the right. Following the small alley, they turned left and right. They successfully arrived at the west side of the city lord's estate. The Fatty stuck his head out from the alley and sized up the city lord's estate. He had observed for a long time, but did not see any patrolling personnel. This made him even more certain that the city lord's estate was currently suffering from internal weakness. The two of them successfully snuck into the city lord's estate. After entering the estate, they saw quite a number of guards patrolling around. The city lord's estate used the method of relaxing the outer layer and tightening the inner layer. They transferred all the people outside back into the estate and increased the intensity of the patrols in the estate. It's a very smart move. Fu Hu muttered, let's not expose ourselves first and then investigate the situation. The two entered a pavilion and hid in a corner. In the courtyard next to them was the city lord's main hall. The two guards walked side by side. Sigh. When will this day end? Back then, the people in the city lord's estate would just muddle along and take advantage of the situation. Shut up. If the city lord hears this, even I will be punished. It's all that Lin Bai's fault. The estate was already short of manpower, and he sent out a few hundred people today. What a torture. However, the city lord has just given the order that no one is allowed to go near his main hall. Even if someone wants to pass on some news, he must first pass it on to the city lord's subordinate so that his subordinate can make a decision. What do you think the city lord is planning to do? I don't know, and I don't want to know either. I just want to yawn and sleep. One of the guards yawned while the other had a solemn expression on his face. Just like that, the two of them passed by the pavilion. In the dark, Fatty and Fu Hu looked at each other as if they were confirming something. Could it be that the city lord has discovered that Lin Bai and the others are still in the secret passage? If that's not the case, then it doesn't make sense for him to not let anyone get close to the main hall. At this point in time, Fatty no longer pretended with Fu Hu and admitted that Lin Bai was in the secret chamber. Is it possible that he planned to enter the main hall himself to do something? For some reason, Fu Hu's guess made Fatty feel a chill all over his body, as if something bad had happened. Shall we go and take a look? Fatty asked and observed Fu Hu's expression. Let's go. Fu Hu answered without the slightest hesitation. It was no wonder. Even though the city lord's estate was heavily patrolled, the lack of manpower would still create some loopholes. In addition, Jin Sheng and Zhang Lai, who were difficult opponents, had already been dealt with. It could be said that as long as they did not encounter the city lord, no one would be able to do anything to them. Who is it? Ah. After entering the courtyard where the city lord's main hall was located, they dealt with 2 guards the moment they landed on the ground. They then threw the corpses into the nearby bushes to cover them up so that they would not be discovered. Hiss, do you feel that the city lord's estate is a little mysterious right now? Do you feel that something is not right? Fatty looked at the city lord's estate. He had been here several times, but this was the first time he had such a special feeling. Yes. Fu Hu's expression was solemn. A little. As the two of them were talking, they had already arrived at the side of the city lord's main hall. After they made sure that all the people around them had been quietly taken care of by them, they quietly opened a window in the main hall, poked their heads in and carefully looked around, praying in their hearts that the city lord would not be here. As expected, the city lord is not here. It's very likely that he has entered the secret chamber. Fatty's expression was a little heavy. He still hoped that the city lord was in the main hall. Only then would Lin Bai and Skinny be safe, and the city lord wouldn't discover their tracks. Do you feel that there's something staring at us in the main hall? Underground of the city lord's estate. Little Blue, the opponent this time isn't simple. Don't be careless. Lin Bai reminded Little Blue. Ever since the 2 people in front of him opened their eyes, Lin Bai felt an inexplicable pressure. This pressure was different from the city lord's Mount Tai pressure, which made people fearful. This pressure made it hard for people to breathe, but at the same time, it also made people feel despair. Lin Bai had never met such an opponent before, and he couldn't help but become more vigilant. He didn't dare to be careless like he was in the previous fights. Little Blue's eyes no longer had the playfulness and relaxation from before. It looked at the 2 people in the middle of the high platform and nodded obediently. Lin Bai took out his sword and held it in his right hand. He then summoned the small cauldron in his left hand to protect himself. Although the small cauldron could not unleash the power of when it broke the restriction, the small cauldron itself had a defense that was not inferior to Little Black's. It could also block some fatal damage for Lin Bai. Moreover, Lin Bai had a vague feeling that he might be about to grasp the method to control the small cauldron. However, before that, he still needed a lot of experiments and training. Whoosh! The figure of a person who was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the high platform flashed and transformed into a shadow. His body was like a bolt of lightning as he arrived in front of Lin Bai in the blink of an eye. He threw a punch towards Lin Bai's face. Lin Bai's expression darkened. He raised his right wrist and stabbed his fist with his sword, wanting to force the fist back. However, Lin Bai did not expect that the opponent's fist did not stop at all. Instead, he secretly increased the strength of his fist, leaving afterimages in the air as his fist streaked through the air. Bang! The tip of the sword and the fist collided. A huge airwave spread out from the center of the 2 people toward the high platform. Little Blue's hair was blown in all directions, and the hair of the other person sitting on the ground was flying in all directions. He's actually fine? The corner of Lin Bai's mouth could not help but twitch. His opponent was actually able to rely on his fist to fight evenly with the tip of the sword. It could be seen that his fist was indestructible. How much had he trained his fist to be able to have such a sturdy degree? However, this thought only flashed through his mind for an instant. Lin Bai's attack failed, and he turned his sword around and slashed at the other party's elbow, vowing to split the other party's arm into 2. Lin Bai's attack was extremely fast. On top of that, the previous exchange of blows had just ended. Even though the other party wanted to use his sword to clash with the other party once more, his speed was still a little lacking, so he could only retreat. I see. The worry in Lin Bai's eyes disappeared, and the corners of his lips curled up. There was no longer any worry or confusion in his eyes. Clearly, this person had trained his fists to the point where they could destroy anything and everything in the world. If he were to be struck by these fists, Lin Bai might lose his ability to fight. However, this kind of person who specialized in one area also had a huge weakness, which was that his other areas were very weak. For example, just as Lin Bai was about to use the blade of his sword to slice open his opponent's arm, his opponent had no time to use his fist to touch the sword, so he could only helplessly leave. This proved this point. Lin Bai and his opponent pulled some distance apart. The two of them looked at each other, and the battle was on the verge of breaking out. However, at this moment, Little Blue rushed up from the side, waving its claws and teeth. Its eyes were filled with a fierce aura. "I'll take care of this. I'll take care of him." Lin Bai did not object to this. He had already figured out his opponent's weakness. It was not difficult to win, but it would take a little time. If you feel that you can't beat him, don't force yourself, Lin Bai warned repeatedly. After all, they had not reached the deepest part of this mystic realm. Before that, none of them could be seriously injured. Otherwise, it would be very disadvantageous to the subsequent stages. Little Blue used both hands and feet and ran wildly towards its opponent. The opponent's face revealed a disdainful expression, and a horizontal fist smashed straight towards it. The speed was extremely fast, and it did not allow anyone to dodge. Little Blue's expression did not change. Its hind legs kicked fiercely, and it jumped high into the air, dodging this attack. However, if it was high in the air, it would have no point of borrowing force. The opponent once again swung out a fist, bringing with it a sharp fist wind, and its face revealed an expression that the battle was over. However, before the punch arrived, Little Blue moved. It wrapped its tail around the opponent's large body. Its legs suddenly exerted force, and its entire body moved in the air. It brushed past the opponent's fist and dodged another attack. Seeing this, Lin Bai retracted his gaze. Little Blue had clearly noticed the opponent's weakness. After so many battles, Little Blue's use of its body had become even more skillful. The outcome of this battle was already decided. Lin Bai turned his gaze towards the other person who was still sitting cross-legged in the middle of the high platform. This person was dressed in white. His strong physique filled up his clothes, and his messy black hair was unruly. When he opened his eyes, a simple and unadorned aura flickered within them. What caught Lin Bai's attention the most was that this person's eyes were red. The red pupils and the white eyeballs made one feel a sense of mystery. Suddenly, the red-eyed person stood up and walked towards Lin Bai step by step. To the naked eye, every step seemed very slow, but he had already arrived in front of Lin Bai in an instant. Hiss! Lin Bai hurriedly retreated, putting some distance between him and his opponent. This person's movement technique was too strange. It seemed very slow, but in fact, it was as fast as lightning. However, Lin Bai's retreating speed was simply not as fast as the opponent's advancing speed. Very soon, he was caught up, and a pair of eagle claws clawed at Lin Bai's head. Lin Bai could only hurriedly swing his long sword and strike at the claws. But just as the sword was about to strike the claws, the person in front of Lin Bai seemed to have disappeared. Bang! Lin Bai's back was struck. Lin Bai hurriedly circulated his cultivation technique, wrapped his back with spiritual energy, and rushed forward with a gust of wind under his feet to reduce the force of the blow. Even so, Lin Bai still had a taste of blood in his mouth. Fortunately, he had defended and dodged in time. Otherwise, if this blow was to follow up, he might have already lost the ability to fight. At that time, Little Blue would be fighting against two people alone, and the outcome would be very obvious. Lin Bai quickly retreated to a corner of the high platform, his eyes staring intently at the person with scarlet eyes. The opponent's attack failed, and his face revealed a look of surprise. Clearly, he thought that he had repelled Lin Bai with just one attack. Whoosh! Lin Bai took the lead to attack. His feet suddenly stomped on the ground, and his robe fluttered in the wind. He swung his long sword straight at the opponent's neck. The person with scarlet eyes was obviously shocked. He had never thought that Lin Bai, who was at a disadvantage, would take the lead to attack. Lin Bai swung his long sword with the momentum of slashing through the heavens. However, once again, when the long sword was about to touch the opponent suddenly disappeared. This time, Lin Bai was not in a rush. He turned his body and swung the small cauldron in his left hand forward. Bang! The palm and the small cauldron collided. Lin Bai stood steadily on the spot, but the scarlet-eyed man took a step back. His face was full of shock as he looked at the small cauldron in Lin Bai's hand in disbelief. Not only that, he didn't expect that Lin Bai would be able to keep up with his rhythm after just one strike. Hey, are you at the end of the rope? Bang! 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 The two of them turned into phantoms and exchanged blows several times in a row. However, every single attack from that person with scarlet eyes was steadily received by Lin Bai with his small cauldron. Lin Bai was not trying to close the distance between them in terms of movement techniques. Instead, he was relying on his own rich combat experience to predict where the other party would attack from the moment the other party moved. Then, he used the small cauldron to hurriedly receive the attack. This did not only rely on Lin Bai's keen observation ability. The small cauldron's impregnable defense was also the key. Otherwise, he would have hurriedly blocked the attack once or twice. Once or twice was fine, but once there was an additional injury, it would accumulate bit by bit. In the end, it would become a defeat. The two of them once again pulled apart the distance. Taking advantage of this gap, Lin Bai glanced at Little Blue. Little Blue and the opponent were locked in a fierce battle. Neither of them was at a disadvantage, and the battle situation was confusing. However, when Lin Bai saw Little Blue's momentum rising bit by bit, he withdrew his gaze. Although Lin Bai was able to block the opponent's attacks every time, he could not deal any substantial damage to that person. If they continued to fight like this, then it would depend on who was the first to tire out. This was not what Lin Bai wanted at all. In order to do more than that, he needed to think of a better way. Bang! The two of them exchanged blows again, and Lin Bai steadily received the attack. However, after this exchange, the opponent took the initiative to retreat. Previously, it was Lin Bai who had found an opportunity to widen the distance between them. This sudden change gave Lin Bai a bad feeling. Hoo-hoo! On the high platform, other than the sounds of Little Blue and the opponent's battle, there were suddenly sounds of heavy breathing. A white smoke suddenly rose from the opponent's body. The person's skin was covered in sweat, and his entire body had shrunk a little towards the middle. Meanwhile, the muscles on his legs were becoming more and more firm. Seeing this, Lin Bai could not help but have a headache. As expected, the person with scarlet eyes slightly exerted strength under his feet, and his figure floated over like a ghost, stepping on Lin Bai's chest from the front. Just like before, Lin Bai used his long sword to block the frontal attack, intending to swing the small cauldron in his hand sideways. However, before the small cauldron could be swung out, Lin Bai realized that this person had changed his personality. He did not act like before, but attacked head-on. In a moment of desperation, Lin Bai could only pull back his longsword and put his elbow against the blade of the sword to block the head-on attack. Bang! The two collided. Lin Bai retreated 5 steps, and his chi and blood surged. He could only quickly circulate his cultivation technique and guide his chi and blood to gradually calm it down. However, the opponent clearly did not want to give Lin Bai a chance to catch his breath. He attacked consecutively, relying on his movement technique to launch a surprise attack. The angle was tricky, and the technique was ruthless. The continuous exchange of blows, coupled with the extremely fast movement technique, only took a short while for the two of them to exchange more than 10 blows. This kind of frequent exchange of blows would continuously magnify some of their weaknesses. The difference in movement technique between Lin Bai and the opponent was being pulled apart bit by bit, not giving Lin Bai the slightest space to catch his breath and think. If there was a momentary pause, then the result would be death. Lin Bai only felt his breathing become faster and faster, and his vision became more and more blurry. However, His hands seemed to become slower and slower, and his brain seemed to become slower. The other party's face revealed a look of joy. He could read the changes in Lin Bai's body and mind from Lin Bai's face. A sharp claw came from below and pinched towards Lin Bai's neck. This claw's power was extraordinary. If the weak neck was pinched, it would definitely be instant death. Lin Bai gritted his teeth and took out a small cauldron to hit the claw. The sound of the two colliding was ear-splitting, but amidst the ear-splitting sound, Lin Bai heard a few ear-piercing sounds. He hurriedly used his sword to smash. Following that, a few metallic sounds rang out. A few small black daggers fell to the ground, and 2 daggers stabbed into Lin Bai's left shoulder. Blood splattered everywhere, and half of his clothes were dyed red. The person with scarlet eyes revealed a delighted smile. He fought wildly since Lin Bai was injured. In the continuous battle, a hint of weariness appeared on Lin Bai's face, and beads of sweat the size of soybeans dripped down his forehead. The other party opened his mouth and looked at Lin Bai's eyes as if he was saying something to him. His expression was full of disdain. Lin Bai stood at the edge of the platform. Just as he was about to put some distance between him and the other party suddenly exerted force on his legs. With 3 steps, he moved like a tiger or a leopard. With one hand, he grabbed at Lin Bai's face, intending to smash him to the ground. Lin Bai panted heavily. He wanted to take out his small cauldron to defend himself, but he hesitated and continued to exchange blows. There was no time for him to catch his breath, causing his movements to slow down by a beat. I won. The other party's lips moved, but he did not make a sound. However, Lin Bai still managed to read his intentions. Poochie. However, the joyful smile on the other party's face froze in an instant. The disdainful look in his eyes was replaced by confusion, and the hand that was stretched out in the air stiffened. He slowly lowered his head, only to see a long sword stabbed into his chest. As the long sword was pulled out, fresh blood splattered everywhere. When did you think that I couldn't make it? Lin Bai's lips curled into a smile. The tiredness and fatigue from before, as well as the heavy breathing, had completely disappeared. Unfortunately, I was the one who acted. The person with scarlet eyes had an unwilling and angry expression on his face. He wanted to open his mouth and roar, but he couldn't make a sound at all. He could only transform into a shadow and blend into the darkness. When Lin Bai saw this, he let out a long sigh of relief and wiped the sweat off his forehead. After fighting with this person, Lin Bai understood that it was not enough to just focus on defense. He needed to find a way to break the situation. Very soon, Lin Bai had a sudden idea. He pretended to be very tired and could not keep up with the opponent's speed in the repeated fights. This kind of state appeared bit by bit. It was very natural. In addition, he was successfully ambushed by his opponent's dagger. It completely dispelled his opponent's worries, causing his opponent to have the mentality of winning for sure. Once he had this kind of mentality, then Lin Bai could wait for an opportunity to attack, just like now. Lin Bai reached out his hand and pulled out the small dagger on his left shoulder. He didn't care about his injury and looked at Little Blue instead. Little Blue's opponent had a pair of iron fists and attacked from both sides like a hot knife through butter. However, taking advantage of this opportunity, Little Blue hooked its tail around its opponent's neck and used all its strength to pierce through his fists. Then, it twisted its body to the back of its opponent's head and threw a punch with all its strength. Bang! A muffled sound was heard. Little Blue's opponent's knees went soft, and he fell to the ground. Then, he turned into a black shadow and disappeared. Well done. Lin Bai patted Little Blue's head lovingly. There were some injuries on Little Blue's abdomen and back. Fortunately, the injuries were not very serious. Then, after the two of them took the medicine, they circulated their spiritual power to catalyze the medicine to heal their injuries. After a long time, Lin Bai opened his eyes and looked at Little Blue. Little Blue, come, I'll impart you. Little Blue's face was initially filled with fatigue, but when it heard Lin Bai say that he was going to impart his cultivation, its eyes lit up and its fatigue was swept away. It rushed in front of Lin Bai excitedly. Its face was filled with impatience. Behave yourself. Don't jump up and down. Do you think I won't impart my cultivation to you? Lin Bai picked up Little Blue who was standing on top of his head, and placed it on the ground in front of him. He started scolding it with a smile, and his eyes were filled with affection. After these few challenges, Little Blue's growth could be seen with the naked eye. This time, he could see Little Blue's innate battle talent just by fighting that fist cultivator alone. This made Lin Bai dote on Little Blue even more. It had a strong talent and high comprehension ability. Its nature was also in line with Lin Bai's expectations. With Lin Bai's hack, how could he be worried that Little Blue would not be strong? Lin Bai put away his thoughts. This challenge had already caused them to suffer heavy injuries. The difficulty of the subsequent challenges could be imagined. Therefore, he had to increase his strength as soon as possible. If he could not win the subsequent challenges, he and Little Blue would have to die here, much less getting revenge from the City Lord. They would die here without even knowing what the City Lord's purpose was. System, I want to pass on my strength to Little Blue, Lin Bai muttered in his heart and put a hand on Little Blue's head. Actually, these steps could be omitted, but unfortunately, Lin Bai liked this kind of ceremonial feeling. Ding! The host has given Little Blue 60 days of cultivation. 50 times of return has been successfully triggered. The host has received 3,000 days of return of cultivation. Crack! Following the series of cold sounds from the system, a crisp sound came from within Lin Bai's body. Something that seemed to be a bottleneck had broken. Lin Bai slowly opened his eyes. A ray of white light shot out from his eyes. He gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and felt extremely comfortable all over his body. The sound of Little Blue's fingers sliding, the sound of a drop of water falling from the darkness in the distance, and the gentle wind blowing in the dark hole. Lin Bai only needed to close his eyes to be able to clearly sense and perceive everything around him. Let me try. Lin Bai's face was filled with joy as he slowly stood up and stood in the middle of the high platform. Huh. Little Blue blinked its eyes and looked at Lin Bai in confusion. It only felt that there was something different about Lin Bai compared to before. Something inexplicable had happened. Whoosh! Lin Bai exerted some strength under his feet and shot out like an arrow that was fully charged. In the blink of an eye, he rushed from one end of the high platform to the other end. Little Blue widened its eyes and couldn't close its mouth. Then, it wiped its eyes with its fist to make sure that it didn't see anything wrong. Hey! Lin Bai walked toward Little Blue leisurely step by step. Although he seemed to be walking leisurely, he arrived in front of Little Blue in a moment. With my current strength, if I were to fight with that person just now, I'm afraid that I wouldn't need to use any bitter tactics to easily win. It would probably be within 10 moves. Lin Bai estimated in his heart and weighed his current strength. Now, he had the confidence to fight with the City Lord. Even if something unexpected happened, he was confident that he would be able to escape from the City Lord's hands. Lin Bai lowered his head and looked at Little Blue, who had not recovered from the shock. Little Blue's body had grown a little bigger, and the color of the fur on its body had become brighter. The lines of the muscles under the fur had gradually taken shape. It seems that Little Blue and I have gained quite a lot. If nothing unexpected happens, we will be able to easily pass through the high platform after this. Lin Bai thought to himself and pointed at his shoulder. Only then did Little Blue come back to its senses. With a light leap, it stood on Lin Bai's shoulder. I did make a breakthrough. Don't be surprised, Lin Bai explained to Blue. You'll be in the same situation in the future. When Little Blue heard this explanation, especially after the last sentence, its face revealed an uncontrollable joy. I'll be in the same situation too? Really? 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 Lin Bai nodded, and his tone was positive. This made Little Blue wonder what would happen after it broke through. In fact, Little Blue wasn't the only one who was curious. Lin Bai was also quite curious about what Little Blue would look like when it grew up. Could it be that cough, cough, cough? Then, a man and a beast walked to the opposite stone bridge once again. After his cultivation level increased, Lin Bai's 5 senses and spiritual sense both increased significantly. He could vaguely sense that there seemed to be something in the terrifying, bottomless pit of darkness under the stone bridge that was filled with an incomparable desire to escape from the darkness. There were also some very powerful existences that had a wild desire. Lin Bai retracted his mind. What was below was not something that he should be having a headache over right now. When everything was over, it would naturally appear on the surface of the water and confess to the world. Now, he should focus all his attention on how to leave this world, or in other words, the mystic realm, and return to the altar. Just as Lin Bai's thoughts drifted away, he had already left the stone bridge and entered the stone wall once again. Little Blue grabbed Lin Bai's hair, its eyes filled with worry. Was the skinny man, the white-clothed man, and Little Blue and the others here like us? Lin Bai nodded. They should be here with us to go through the challenges on the high platform. Little Blue gestured with her hands. Will they be in danger? Lin Bai shook his head. Don't worry. I approve of their strength. Although it's a little difficult, it won't be difficult for them here. Hearing Lin Bai's words, Little Blue's heart was at ease. Just as the man and the beast were conversing. While they were conversing, they walked out of the mountain wall once again and saw the two stone bridges in front of them connected. In the middle, there was a flat and unadorned high platform. This high platform seems to be a little different. Lin Bai gazed into the distance. He could clearly sense that this high platform seemed to be twice as big as the previous one. Apart from the change in size, the thickness of the high platform was also more than twice as thick. However, whether it's a mule or a horse, I have to take it out for a walk. I won't know whether it's difficult or not until I beat it up. Not long after breaking through, Lin Bai saw the obvious changes on the platform. His face didn't show any signs of retreat. Instead, he was like Little Blue, full of eagerness to try. He was eager to experience the strength of a breakthrough in cultivation. Rumble. After the man and the beast walked onto the high platform, the stone bridge behind them shattered and fell into the bottomless abyss. The invisible imprisonment enveloped the entire high platform. A thick layer of black smoke emerged from the center of the high platform. As the cold wind blew, the black smoke spread in all directions, revealing a mountain-like figure. It was a gorilla, with 4 limbs on the ground and a height of 20 meters. The gorilla was covered in red patterns. It was as if lava was flowing within these patterns. Lava giant ape? Lin Bai's rarely seen angry eyes stared in disbelief at the 20-meter-tall giant ape in front of him. Lin Bai had once read about the lava giant ape in a book. It was an extremely rare spirit beast with an extremely precious and powerful bloodline. It was a spirit beast that many beastmasters dreamed of. Although the lava giant ape's movements were clumsy, its strength was as strong as Mount Tai, and its defense was indestructible. In terms of destructive power, it was ranked at the top among spirit beasts. Roar! Just as Lin Bai was deep in thought, the lava giant ape opened its bloody mouth, revealing its terrifying fangs. Its roar was so loud that one's eardrums were about to explode, and their ears ached. Lin Bai suppressed the shock in his heart, and an eager expression appeared on his face. It's fine, it's fine. A legendary spirit beast like you can let me test my power. Little Blue did not show the slightest intention of retreating. She clenched her fists at the lava giant ape, and her face was filled with provocation. The lava giant ape lowered its eyebrows and glanced at the provocative man and beast. Its fiery eyes shot out a ruthless look, and with a fierce push of its hind legs, it leaped high into the air. And because of the lava giant ape's actions, the high platform trembled slightly. Boom! The lava giant ape threw a punch from high up in the air. This punch was surrounded by a scorching red color, as if it was a real flame. Lin Bai stood where he was, his eyes as calm as still water. He bent his knees slightly, twisted his waist slightly, and suddenly punched out. Bang! Lin Bai's fist collided with the giant lava ape's mountain-like fist, producing an explosive sound. The high platform under Lin Bai's feet began to tremble violently, as if in the next moment, the high platform would not be able to withstand this force and collapse. Lin Bai's feet seemed to have taken root as he stood firmly on the spot with a calm expression. The lava ape, however, took a small step back after landing on the ground due to the majestic force. The lava ape revealed an astonished gaze as it looked at the spotless Lin Bai. It had never expected that a person would actually be able to fight it head-on and even put it at a slight disadvantage. Roar! The giant lava ape failed in its first attack. It waved its fists and legs again and threw them at Lin Bai in a frenzy. It was like the pouring rain, not giving anyone a chance to catch their breath. Lin Bai remained where he was and did not dodge at all. Like the giant lava ape, he waved his fists and legs, using offense as a defense. It seems that if it wasn't for the increase in my cultivation level, this giant lava ape would have made me suffer. Lin Bai began to think. After breaking through, his strength would be on the same level as the lava ape, and he would be able to defeat the lava ape by relying on the cultivation technique manuals. If he had broken through his previous cultivation level, Lin Bai might have used an even more difficult and dangerous method to win. It would have been impossible for him to defeat the lava ape head-on. At this moment, Little Blue was jumping up and down. It was about to rush up and fight with the lava ape, but it was stopped by Lin Bai. Little Blue, leave this one to me. You fought enough. Some of your injuries haven't fully recovered yet. Quickly take some medicine to heal them. Lin Bai then threw some pills to Little Blue. Little Blue looked at the lava ape with eager eyes, then at the pills in its hand and Lin Bai. Although it was extremely unwilling, it could only obediently retreat to the side. When it reached the corner of the high platform, it did not forget to look back at Lin Bai. Then you must leave the next one to me. Lin Bai could not help but laugh. All right, I'll leave it to you. Seeing that Lin Bai had agreed, Little Blue focused all its attention on recuperating its injuries. Lin Bai's conversation with Little Blue was carried out at the same time as the battle between Lin Bai and the lava ape. His distraction during the battle made the lava ape feel humiliated and looked down on. Roar! The lava ape slapped its chest with both hands, letting out a series of deafening muffled sounds. This sound was extremely uncomfortable, and it felt as if the blood in its body was boiling and restless. Its entire being became increasingly restless. Fortunately, Lin Bai's cultivation base had broken through, so he was not affected by it. Rumble, rumble. The sound of boiling lava came from within the lava ape's body. Water vapor surged out from the lava ape's body, and half of the high platform was enveloped by the white vapor. Then, the patterns on the lava ape's fur began to faintly glow, and they emitted a scorching temperature. Soon, the lava ape's body seemed to be covered in lava, turning into a dazzling red and white. Seeing the changes in the lava ape, Lin Bai couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This was the first time he had seen such a terrifying change from a spirit beast. Bang! The lava giant ape took a step forward, causing the high platform to tremble. Bang! The lava giant ape took another step forward. The air on the high platform was scorching hot, making one feel as if their chests were burning. Lin Bai could feel that after activating the potential of the bloodline, the speed of the lava giant ape had slowed down by a notch, but the aura of the giant ape had been rising steadily. If it was someone with a weak state of mind, they would have already thought of retreating when they saw the true appearance of the lava ape. It was even possible for them to be crushed into minced meat by the lava ape as they stood rooted to the ground like wooden chickens. Little Blue, who was recuperating from its injuries, opened its eyes in worry when it saw the changes on the high platform. However, when it saw Lin Bai's figure and the imposing aura that seemed to be able to topple Mount Tai before it, Little Blue slowly closed its eyes in peace. Boom! The lava ape threw another punch. This punch was filled with hot lava, as if it wanted to burn everything in its path. The power contained within it was enough to destroy the world. Lin Bai stood unmoving on the spot, his eyes staring intently at that punch. Just as the fist was only a ruler's distance away from him, and the leg of Lin Bai's robe was set ablaze. Lin Bai moved. He suddenly exerted strength under his feet, leaving behind an afterimage on the spot. However, his figure seemed to have disappeared from the high platform. However, Lin Bai's figure was still captured by the giant lava ape. The giant lava ape turned its head and saw Lin Bai, who had already arrived beside it. It opened its mouth and spat out a sky full of lava, which shot out from its mouth like a meteorite. Fall. Lin Bai's movements were agile. It was as if he had passed through a field of flowers, and every leaf did not touch his body. He dodged the pieces of lava one after another. A moment later, Lin Bai arrived under the giant lava ape. He stepped on the giant lava ape's knee, and his body rose high. Immediately after, He kicked at the giant lava ape's head. The lava ape did not dodge. In other words, the ape had no intention of dodging at all. It opened its bloody mouth and bit at Lin Bai. As the ape opened and closed its mouth, a scorching wave of air swept over, burning the clothes on Lin Bai's legs and burning a few layers of the skin on his legs. Hiss! The pain of his legs being burned caused Lin Bai to suck in a breath. However, he did not take back the corner that he had pulled out. Instead, he increased his strength. Bang! Lin Bai's leg technique was as fast as lightning as it smashed into the huge tusk on the huge ape. With a cracking sound, a pale white tooth fell onto the high platform. The lava giant ape was also kicked by this force. Its huge body was smashed backwards, and it landed heavily on the high platform. Rumble! The high platform made of indestructible rocks trembled from the impact of the lava ape. It was like a violent earthquake. Little Blue opened its eyes in surprise. She looked at Lin Bai, and then at the lava ape that was lying on the ground. Little Blue only felt that Lin Bai's tall and straight figure seemed to have become incomparably great. There was even an aura that seemed as if it wanted to soar to the sky. Lin Bai landed steadily on the ground. Only at this moment did he truly feel the difference between his cultivation level after breaking through and his previous cultivation level. The difference between the two was not just a little bit. It was a substantial breakthrough. Roar! The lava giant ape roared in pain. After being injured, the giant ape became even more ruthless and cruel. Its eyes were crimson red and had turned into the color of lava. As the giant ape panted heavily, it seemed as if flames were flowing out of its lungs. The lava ape was no longer as calm as before. It used its limbs and pounced towards Lin Bai. At the same time, it opened its mouth and spat out lava all over the sky, sweeping towards Lin Bai. The dense and majestic lava did not give anyone any space to dodge. In addition, they had to face the lava ape head-on. If anyone else had come, they would already be in the death realm. Whether it was escaping or fighting head-on, it was simply impossible. Lin Bai's feet swayed, and his figure was like a ghost. He appeared at several spots and dodged the lava that had just arrived. However, at this moment, the lava ape that was crawling over with its hands and feet also used its solid body to pounce fiercely at Lin Bai. It wanted to use its mountain-like body to crush Lin Bai into minced meat. Have you lost your mind? Lin Bai looked at the lava ape, and his tone was a little cold. However, just as the lava giant ape was about to pounce on him, Lin Bai's legs. He exerted strength and charged toward the lava giant ape. One of them was on the top while the other was on the bottom, and they missed each other. Boom! The high platform trembled again because of the lava giant ape. At this moment, Lin Bai had already arrived at the side of the lava giant ape. He stopped, turned around, and jumped high into the air. He jumped behind the lava giant ape and climbed to the back of its head. Poochie! Lin Bai used his hand as a knife and stabbed into the back of the lava giant ape's neck and head. He pulled out his hand knife, and fresh blood spurted out, mixed with white liquid. Lin Bai felt a burning sensation when he pulled out his hand. He had never thought that the blood of the lava giant ape would be boiling. Lin Bai quickly swung his hand to clean the burning blood on it so that his palm would not be burned. His leg had already been burned and peeled, so he did not want the same thing to happen to his hand. Right now, he did not have any good burn medicine on his body, so it would be quite troublesome for his wound to heal. Roar! The lava giant ape let out a heart-rending roar that echoed throughout the entire abyss. Somewhere in the darkness, when the thin man heard the heart-rending roar, his entire body could not help but tremble. His eyes looked like they were the eyes of a thief as he carefully looked around, afraid that there was something hidden in the darkness that he could not see. Ahem, Little Black, did you hear something? The skinny man looked at Little Black beside him. After the altar was absorbed by the mysterious power, the two of them challenged many high platforms in a row and walked side by side. Little Black looked at the darkness on the right and nodded. The voice came from there, as if it had the aura of its owner. Little Black tried its best to use its claws and eyes to communicate with the skinny man. When the skinny man saw it, he let out a sigh of relief. It was strange. At first, The skinny man could not understand Little Black's words, but gradually, the man and the beast could communicate without any obstacles. Sigh! The skinny man looked at the stone bridge in front of him. He knew that another round of high platforms had come. I wonder how Lin Bai and Baishir doing. Are they in the same situation as us? When Little Black heard Lin Bai's name, his eyes sparkled. Master must be fine. This place is easy for him. Fine, fine, fine. I know your master is powerful. The skinny man rolled his eyes at Little Black. Another high platform. This time, it's the same as before. You defend and attract the aggro while I attack from the side. Little Black nodded solemnly. Lin Bai turned left and right in pain. He held the long sword in his hand and thrust it upwards. A huge head rolled onto the ground, and the blood that spurted out dyed the entire high platform red. After Lin Bai landed on the ground, he wiped the sweat on his forehead. He had thought that stabbing the back of the lava giant ape's head with his hand would be enough to kill it. However, he did not expect the lava giant ape to actually start a vicious counterattack after it had fallen into a dead end. If it was not for Lin Bai's breakthrough, he might really have been killed by the lava giant ape. After repeatedly confirming that the lava giant ape that had split up no longer had the ability to stand up, Lin Bai finally let out a long sigh of relief. After seeing the remains of the lava giant ape turn into black smoke, he finally relaxed. A rich spiritual energy naturally surged into Lin Bai's body from the air. This rich spiritual energy was pure and without any impurities. This spiritual energy was twice as strong as other spiritual energies. The invisible shackles around the high platform disappeared once again, announcing that Lin Bai had successfully challenged the high platform this time. Little Blue jumped up and down from the back and jumped onto Lin Bai's shoulder, chattering nonstop. Don't worry, I'm not injured. The next time I meet such an opponent, I'll definitely hand it over to you. Lin Bai pinched Little Blue's face with his hand and took the opportunity to check the injuries on Little Blue's body. The injuries are healing well. They are mostly healed. It won't affect the subsequent battles. Lin Bai picked Little Blue up again and placed it on the ground in front of him. Seeing Lin Bai's actions, Little Blue was ecstatic because it knew that he was going to pass on his cultivation. System, I'm going to pass on my cultivation to Little Blue. Lin Bai muttered to the system in his heart. Even though he and Little Blue wouldn't have much improvement after passing on his cultivation this time, it was clear that they were at the end of this mystic realm. Even if it was just a tiny bit of improvement, Lin Bai couldn't waste it. He had to be fully prepared and ready. Ding! The host has given Little Blue 80 days of cultivation. 30 times of return has been successfully triggered. The host has received 2,400 days of return of cultivation. Little Blue felt a surge of power surging into its body, and then its entire body seemed to be filled with power. There were also some things that it didn't understand that were becoming stronger and emerging. This made Little Blue jump up in joy. Lin Bai sized up Little Blue. Compared to before, Little Blue's body was a little bigger. Imagine. Not bad. If this continues, after we get out of here, your strength will have a qualitative leap compared to before. Lin Bai said to Little Blue while calculating in his heart. If it was as he had calculated, then there should be 2 more high platforms waiting for them. According to his previous experience, the difficulty of the next stage should not be much different from that of the lava ape. And the stage after, which was the last stage, would have a breakthrough in strength. City Lord's estate, main hall. Fatty and Fu Hu repeatedly confirmed that there was no ambush around the main hall, and that there was no City Lord in the main hall. In the end, they sneaked into the main hall. Fatty had just stepped into the main hall when he felt a chill all over his body. He felt as if he was being closely watched by something, and that gaze made him feel extremely uncomfortable. What AF * King strange thing? Do you feel it? Fatty's eyes sized up the entire main hall as he quietly asked Fu Hu beside him. Fu Hu's expression also became serious, and he nodded. There is indeed something strange here, but I can be sure that the City Lord is not in the main hall at this moment. He should have already entered the secret chamber. Fatty confirmed that the City Lord was not behind the main hall, but his heart was in his throat. The City Lord going to the secret chamber to look for Lin Bai and the others was one of the things he did not want to see the most. What kind of place was the secret chamber? There had always been only one entrance and exit in such a place. If the city lord entered at this time, it would be impossible for Lin Bai and the others to escape. It was inevitable that they would have a direct confrontation with the city lord. However, after these few days of fighting with the city lord, Fatty felt that together with the thin man, they were not even comparable to the city lord's palm. Even Lin Bai and the city lord had an irreparable difference. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of air being torn echoed in the ceiling of the hall. At this moment, the sky was gradually darkening. In addition to the fact that there was no one in the hall, the line of sight in the entire hall was very thin. The ceiling was pitch black, and they could not see clearly. However, their ears would not deceive them. At this moment, there was something sinister hidden on the ceiling. Fatty and Fu-Hu looked at each other and took out a wooden cylinder each. They removed the lid on one end of the wooden cylinder and blew on it slowly. A ball of fire started to rise from within. This type of fire cylinder was usually used to light a fire. Even if they wanted to use it to illuminate the light, it would be too weak. However, at this point, they could only make do with it. Whoosh! Clang! The sound of air being torn apart and the sound of metal colliding could be heard. Fatty's hand that was holding the short sword was slightly numb. That strange thing in the darkness just now wanted to sneak attack him in the dark, but Fatty managed to use the short sword to knock it away in time. However, the strength of the other party's throw was really great, causing Fatty's thumb to feel slightly numb. Over there! Fu-Hu shouted coldly. Stepping on the ground with both feet, his body soared high into the air as he brandished a knife in his hand and hacked down. Poo-poo-poo. The sound of wings flapping could be heard in the darkness. Fu-Hu's slash missed, but the fire tube in his other hand lit up the thing in the darkness. What the hell is this thing? Fatty looked at the ceiling. There was a pair of black wings growing out of it. Its eyes were dark green, and its body looked like a monkey or a bat. Huh! The pitch-black monster let out a sharp cry. The sharp cry went deep into the brain, making people feel a sharp pain in their brains. Along with the sharp cry, the monster found an opportunity to pounce at Fatty. A pair of sharp claws and teeth came from the depths of the monster, clawing at Fatty's neck. Fatty endured the pain in his head and waved the short sword in his hand. He stabbed straight at the monster's wings, forcing the other party to give up the attack midway and dodge to the other side. Damn it, there's another one. Fu-Hu's cry came from the side, but the Fatty was unable to pay attention to it. When the Fatty saw the monster dodge to the right, he gritted his teeth and chased after it. He stretched out a hand to grab the pair of wings, but when the Fatty grabbed the wings, he only felt that the wings were sticky and slippery, and he could not grab them. Relying on the light from the torch in his hand, the Fatty looked at his hand. The originally white and fat hand was now bright red, and it was emitting a fishy smell. Blood. Fatty felt his scalp explode. He had seen many evil spirit beasts, but this was the first time he had seen something like this. Moreover, he didn't know why, but he had a feeling that this thing shouldn't have existed in this world. How can there be people here? You are so hysterical. Even Lin Bai wouldn't dare to break into the city lord's main hall. Are you crazy? Aya, listen to me. I really saw two figures coming this way. We'll know whether they're here or not after we take a look. Wait, is there some sound in the hall? There's no sound. There really is. Just as Fatty and Fu-Hu were engaged in a bitter battle with the monsters, the sound of two guards came from outside the main door of the hall. Creak. The main door of the main hall was pushed open, and two figures appeared inside. Fatty and Fu-Hu wanted to dodge, but the two monsters made it impossible for them to escape. The other party used their pitch-black vision to hide in the darkness after failing to attack, and continued to wait for an opportunity to act. It really gave them a headache. Who are you? You dare to barge into the city lord's estate? One of the guards saw Fatty and Fu-Hu, and a fierce look appeared on his face. He pulled out the long knife at his waist and was about to attack. Wait, what do you think that is? The other guard's face was a little pale. He pointed at the monster with one hand, and his arms and calves were trembling. The monster flew down from the sky. Fatty raised his short knife to protect himself, but this time, The monster surprisingly did not attack. Instead, it made a big turn and flew toward the two guards at the front door. The monster that was fighting with Fu, who also rushed towards the guards at the main gate like Fatty. Although Fatty did not know what the two monsters were going to do, an inexplicable instinct made him feel that something bad was about to happen. He used all his strength to chase after them and shouted, "Run, you two, run!" However, the two guards were still in shock. By the time they reacted and wanted to run, the two monsters had already flown over. They used their sharp claws to pierce through their collarbones and carried them into the darkness of the ceiling of the main hall. Crack, crack. A creepy sound came from the darkness. Fatty and Fu who gritted their teeth and wanted to investigate. However, before they could find the two monsters, two black shadows fell to the ground. What are these? Fatty used the light in his hand to shine a light on them. Then, he saw two bodies that were only skin and bones. From their clothes, he could tell that these were the two guards. Fatty, look! Fu Hu poked Fatty with his elbow. Fatty followed Fu Hu's direction and looked into the darkness ahead. There were two pairs of green eyes flashing. The color of these eyes was exactly the same as the two monsters, but the size of the eyes was twice as big as before. The sound of hair, claws, and teeth scraping against the floor, and the sound of wings flapping could be heard from the darkness. Fatty and Fu Hu both had a bad feeling. They wanted to turn around and run, but after seeing the speed of these two monsters, they quickly dismissed this thought. Running was a dead end. If they fought, they still had a chance of survival. Am I seeing things? Am I seeing things? Fatty's eyes, which were not big to begin with, opened wide at this moment as he looked forward in disbelief. Two figures slowly walked out from the darkness. They were the two monsters from before. However, what was different from before was that they were now as big as adults. One had to know that the two monsters from before were only as big as medium-sized dogs. When they were small, they had already given Fatty and Fu Hu such a headache. Now, they had become as big as them. Fatty swallowed his saliva dryly, and the sound of swallowing his saliva reverberated throughout the entire hall. In addition, the sky was already completely dark, and the atmosphere in the hall was even stranger. It was currently a sweltering summer day, but the temperature in the hall was like an ice hole. Fatty and Fu Hu could not help but shudder. Looks like this is the City Lords. As Fatty spoke, he turned his head to look at Fu Hu beside him. At this moment, Fu Hu also happened to turn his head. The two of them looked at each other, and they could both feel that they were thinking about the same thing. These two monsters were probably the City Lord's monsters that he had used some unknown method to summon or nurture. Therefore, they could not use their usual experience in dealing with spirit beasts to deal with the two monsters in front of them. After seeing that they had absorbed the strength of the guards, they were even more certain that they could not let these two monsters escape. Otherwise, they would really have to die in the City Lord's estate and become nutrients for these two monsters. Horse. The two monsters once again let out the sharp roars from before and immediately charged towards the two of them. These two monsters had previously taken the initiative to hide in the darkness and then launch surprise attacks. However, they had now taken the initiative to charge forward. It was obvious that the suction guard had made a qualitative leap in the strength of these monsters. Fatty did not dare to be careless. His body was fat, but his footwork was abnormally agile. He carefully took a few steps back while his eyes carefully scrutinized the movements of the monsters. The monsters were flapping their wings, opening their scarlet fangs and waving their two front claws to attack. They caught up to Fatty in the blink of an eye. Fatty took advantage of the opportunity. In the middle of retreating, his agile body suddenly stopped and twisted to the right, moving sideways to avoid the monster. However, the monster was too fast and did not have time to stop. Fatty raised the short sword in his hand high and suddenly chopped down, aiming at one of the monster's wings. Poochie. Green blood splashed, mixed with the rotten stench of rotten apples and dead flies. The right wing of the monster was cut off from the root by Fatty. After losing one of its wings, the monster lost its balance and crashed heavily into the wall in the distance, rolling on the ground. Phew! Fatty wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Fortunately, these two monsters had weapons, but their brains were not very useful. If it were a human, Fatty's move would not have worked at all. However, Fatty's happiness did not last long. The monsters that had rolled on the ground slowly climbed up with difficulty. Their dark green eyes were filled with malice and ruthlessness, and the fangs in their mouths were biting each other. Come, I want to tell you that your grandpa Fatty is not a pushover. Fatty quickly collected his thoughts. He had never thought that he could kill the monster with a single strike. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and his face was full of an expression that wanted to be beaten up. The monster that was only left with one wing had lost its rationality due to anger. It charged straight at Fatty again. Fatty saw the monster charging over and was momentarily stunned. Has this monster become faster? Right at this moment, Fu-Hu, who was fighting another monster beside him, shouted to remind Fatty. Fatty, be careful. The speed and strength of this monster are increasing. I'm afraid that the strength that it gained from absorbing the guard's energy is still slowly being absorbed into its body. Bang! The short sword in Fatty's hand collided with the monster's claws and teeth. The short sword let out a crisp, cracking sound and was broken into two halves, causing Fatty's heart to turn cold. The monster's attack had succeeded, and it became even more violent. Its body had already twisted at a strange angle, and it turned its body to the side and opened its mouth to bite at the monster again. Fatty could only take out a foot and kick the monster's chin from the bottom up. However, Fatty had never expected that the monster would not dodge at all. His foot fiercely lifted the monster's chin, and the monster was kicked by this powerful force, and it was sent spinning in the air and smashed into the ceiling. The sound of bones breaking, the sound of green blood dripping on the floor, and the monster's heavy panting filled with anger could be heard. F***CK. Fatty took a few steps back and came to the main door of the hall. He closed the open door with one foot. Just absorbing one guard was already so terrifying. If 2 or 3 more came, or more than 10, Fatty did not dare to imagine that scene. They are not afraid of pain at all, nor are they afraid, Fatty muttered in his heart. If I want to get rid of these 2 monsters, I must tear them into pieces like rags. Fu-Hu was fully focused on fighting with the monsters. He wanted to see Fatty's situation, but he could not spare the time to do so. Suddenly, a powerful and overbearing aura gradually emerged from behind Fu-Hu. This aura seemed to reach the clouds. Fu-Hu couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He hurriedly took a few steps back and took the opportunity to glance at the Fatty who was standing in front of the main door. He seemed to have fallen into a special state. Secret skill? Fu-Hu was a little surprised. Some special cultivation techniques were accompanied by some secret skills. These secret skills had different abilities, but they all had great power. However, each secret skill would come with a great price. Therefore, in this world, there were very few people who used secret techniques. Unless it was absolutely necessary, no one would use them. Crack. The clothes on Fatty's upper body were torn apart, revealing his muscular upper body. However, under the bloated flesh, there seemed to be a surge of power. As the power surged, the flesh on Fatty's body began to collapse at a speed visible to the naked eye. The monster that was fighting with Fatty also noticed the change in Fatty, but it did not care about it at all. It opened its bloody mouth and tried to tear Fatty's stomach open. Just as the monster and Fatty were close to each other, Fatty moved. Boom! Fatty stepped out, and the marble bricks on the floor of the hall caved in and shattered into powder. On the other hand, Fatty's hill-like body displayed a speed that did not match his body. He grabbed the top of the monster's head with one hand, wanting to smash the monster to the ground. Hoochie! Dark green blood splattered everywhere. Aren't you pretty good at flying, running, and screaming? Why aren't you arrogant anymore? Fatty's shout was accompanied by the sound of flesh, hair, and bones being torn apart. The last piece of head that was as black as a dog's head was thrown into the center of the hall. After rolling a few times, there was no more reaction. Fu-Hu looked at the Fatty who had transformed into someone else beside him. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but after holding it in for a long time, he only managed to say one word, F***CK. At this moment, the monster opposite Fu-Hu roared and pounced over. Fu-Hu could only retract his thoughts once again and sink into a bitter struggle. Even so, he did not forget to shout for help. "Fatty, quickly come and help me." The monster on Fatty's side had already been dealt with. If the two of them worked together to get rid of the remaining monster, they would be able to investigate the true appearance of these things together. Hee hee. Fuhu's heart was filled with waiting for Fatty's help, but he did not expect that Fatty would actually sneer. He even leaned against the wall and sat at the side, relaxing as if he was watching a play. He watched as Fuhu fought with the monster and saw how exciting Fuhu or the monster was. He did not forget to clap his hands and cheer. "Fatty, what are you doing? Don't tell me you have no strength after using the secret skill?" Fuhu continued to ask, his face full of anxiety. "No, I'm just a little tired and want to watch the show. Continue to ignore me," Fatty shamelessly said, and even clapped his hands and cheered. This time, even if he was a fool, he knew what Fatty's intention was. "Fatty, if you help me, I'll definitely give you a heavy gift to thank you." Fuhu waved his hand at the monster and smashed 2 pieces of the monster's sternum, but he could not stop the monster. "I'm a vulgar person. I like things that can be seen now." Fatty was not in a hurry at all, and his speaking speed slowed down even more. Previously, this Fuhu had made him suffer a lot, and Fatty had the motto of take advantage of his illness and take his life, so naturally, he could not miss such a good opportunity. If he missed it today, Fatty would wake up in a rage in the middle of the night. "I have the vitality fortifying pill here. Didn't you just break through? It can help you consolidate your foundation after breaking through. It's good for your future cultivation as much as possible. Even in the Alchemist Association, only the higher-ups can use it." Fuhu gritted his teeth as he spoke, and his heart still hurt a little when he said it. He had originally prepared this vitality fortifying pill for himself. It was just that the serial trivial matters after breaking through had made him not have the time to take it, and so it had been delayed until now. If not for the current situation, he would not have planned to exchange the vitality fortifying pill at all. Not only would he not exchange it, he would not even let others know that he had it on him. "Vitality fortifying pill, huh? It's one good thing," Fatty muttered to himself, and specially bit one a little harder. "Didn't you break your short sword? It just so happens that I have one as well. If I exchange it for money, the price will be comparable to this vitality fortifying pill." Fuhu knew that he could not trap the wolf with a child, so he could only offer some benefits in pain. Yes, I do need a short sword. This is not bad, but..." As the Fatty spoke, he fell into deep thought once again. When Fuhu heard this, he cursed the Fatty in his heart, but he did not dare to show any expression on his face. His expression was full of fawning expressions. Although Fuhu looked strong and muscular, he really could not do anything to this monster. If he wanted to deal with this monster, he would have to crush it into pieces. Although he had some hidden skills, he did not want to show them here. Fuhu's heart hardened. Seeing that Fatty still had no intention of agreeing, he immediately turned around and ran towards the main door of the main hall. He stretched out a hand and grabbed the door, vowing to open the door. "You mother f*** cur," Fatty immediately cursed. "F***ck. Fuhu, you really don't even care about your face." Fatty and Fuhu had been spending time together during this period of time, so they naturally knew what Fuhu was trying to do. Since this monster was something Fuhu could not deal with, and Fatty was completely not afraid and even wanted to use this to extort him. Then Fuhu planned to let this monster out and absorb the guards outside. When that time came, Fatty would help no matter what. The wind beneath Fatty's feet turned into a nimble Fatty. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the main door and grabbed the monster that was about to fly out. Rip. Fatty's thick hands directly tore a pair of monster's wings into pieces. Then, he grabbed the monster's 2 legs with one hand and forcefully pulled. Dark green blood splattered. Half of Fatty's body was already stained with green blood. At this moment, with the addition of another monster, his entire body became bloody. The corner of Fuhu's mouth twitched when he saw this, and the fear in his heart grew even more. Fortunately, he did not have any killing intent towards Fatty. Cough cough. Although he had cheated Fatty many times, it was not a big deal. After a series of bone fractures and the sound of flesh tearing, Fatty let out a long sigh of relief and lay in a pool of blood without a care. Seeing the monster walking over, Fu Hu slowly walked over. Fu Hu was about to say something when he realized that the fat on Fatty's body had been reduced by a whole circle. The lines on his face had also started to appear. You've become so fat. Could it be because of this secret skill? How cruel. The corner of Fu Hu's mouth twitched again. He had originally thought that Fatty was just a lazy person who liked to eat. He did not expect that he had worked so hard to make himself fat just to use this secret skill. How many people could achieve such perseverance? Fatty replied without shame. That is natural when I was thin. I was handsome, even the next-door widow took extra glances at me. But in order to cultivate the Tao of martial arts, I ate myself fat. Sigh. Fu Hu's face showed an apologetic expression. It seems that I am shallow. I looked down on you a little before. Haha, are you looking at me in a new light? The expression on Fatty's face became more and more arrogant. I'm really looking at you in a new light. As Fu Hu spoke,